Hey everyone. Um, uh, Wanted to have a little bit of a short story with the podcast. Um, so on my website, I received another letter, and this letter came from a gentleman, Mark Z. Um, he never told me that he wanted to keep it anonymous or anything like that, but he retired here some years ago, so I don't know how long ago that is. It just says I retired some years ago. Um, he did mention uh, that they lived in the South. Now, a couple times he mentioned that. Um, he even said Old South. Now, being I'm from Canada, I took the Old South to mean the Deep South. I don't know if the Old South is a term used by people from like way down there, or if it's what they like Floridians might call themselves. Or, anyways, it just says Old South. Anyways, it starts off. It says, "Hello, I'm writing you this letter in the hope that someone out there, one of my viewers or somebody comes to the website, because this I've." So what I do is every time I get a letter or I get a note, I put it in a blog on the website. So you can go to the website and you can actually read these letters. They're all there by date. It's all in the blog. I don't, so I just add to the blog. Um, um, I was going to delete or erase the other letters, but then I kind of thought, well, no, maybe if the website and the blog takes right off and goes haywire, then yeah, I'll be forced to. But as where things are just starting out and kind of going along, I'd like to keep the dates like going of when I receive them. So um, kind of kind of a nice little you could read it, you go back and say, look, it's still up there. You can tell friends about it and say, yeah, go to this site and read this. Maybe this person's had that. And if you know somebody that is having a an experience, they can go there and either read about it and know they're not alone, or gain some comfort, or maybe just the enjoyment of reading, whatever. So that starts off, it says, "Hello, I'm writing you this letter in the hope that someone out there might have had the same experience that I had. I retired a number of years ago. I loved what I did, and the job I held allowed me to travel to see other parts of the world. When I retired, my wife and I decided to settle down in the South. Now it just says South there. We bought a house that needed work, as that's what we wanted, because we could make the house ours. And the house came with land. So I don't know how much land it came with. It could have been 10 acres, might have been 100 acres. I don't know. Up here in the part of Canada I live in, the old land grants or King's grants, they were 98 acres. Um, it's something to do with being a landlord. I have no idea. As we worked on our house, we lived in the camper on site at first. Everything was great, but then things started going missing. We laughed, my wife, him and his wife, laughed about it at first, so I'm assuming they laughed about the things going missing. Now, when I get a letter, I don't go through it in correct grammar or anything like that. And trust me, that's hard for me to do. But I want that person's words to be that person's words. I don't want you to be reading something I doctored up, because that wouldn't be right to you guys or to the sender. I'm not a English lit teacher. I'm not a grammar teacher. Trust me, I've made plenty of my own errors I write novels, and I only have a high school education. I'm not a university educated person at all. And if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't have had a high school education. So when I started writing, it was rough. So I know what it's like to have people change your words, and then eventually everything is not yours. So I don't do that to people. I put their words right up on my site. That's just the way it is. And for the most part, people get their ideas across. They can get across what they want you to understand. So we laughed about it at first, kidding each other about getting older. So be him and his wife. Then it went from small things going missing to one of our dogs missing. My wife called the sheriff and waited for the patrol car to come out while I went looking for our pet. I found our beloved pet lost the back side of the property, so the back of the property. When I approached her, she turned and for a moment didn't recognize me. When I got back to the house with the dog, my wife was talking to two sheriff's officers. They were happy that we had our dog back. Then before they left, one of the deputies looked at my wife and said, "We shouldn't have dogs on the property." So I guess the husband and wife were sitting there talking to them, and before they got back into the car, the sheriff's deputy warned them about having pets on the property. Now, that being said, so if a local law enforcement officer, especially an older local law enforcement officer, warns you about having pets or having anything on your property, like it's not a good idea, that usually means there's a history. Now, if it's a younger officer, it's usually that history's come down through maybe his training officer or something. But law enforcement, and I have friends and family that are law enforcement, they get calls for all kinds of reasons. And I mean, the vast majority are human related. Somebody's mad at you and they've, taken your dog or cat or whatever. It's a vicious, terrible thing for anybody to lose a pet. It's for a lot of young people that don't have children, the pets are their children. And older people too, that their family, their kids have grown up and moved away and all that stuff. They replace that with the pet. So to have somebody come and do something that's terrible. So the officer warned them they shouldn't have dogs on the property. Before we could question them on that statement, they drove off. I assume that the deputy was worried about rattlesnakes on the land, which, okay, they're in the South. That's a valid assumption, and it's a valid worry. Sounds like they had quite a bit of property. Maybe a good portion of it was wild. So, that's okay. However, I felt the need to find out what, if anything, had happened on the property before we bought it. Now, if you go to buy a house, and I don't know how true this is, but people keep telling me that if there's a murder committed in the house, the real estate agent has to divulge that to you. But, this is old land. This land wasn't made, this land, it just didn't pop up when Columbus or Cabot or any of them landed here. The natives were here, tens of thousands of years. There's even some saying that they were always here, that the theory of the natives crossing over the Bering Strait, the Clovis people, might have ran into native people that were already here, that there was a people here already. Don't know. Anyways, they can't go back too far in history. So if you're buying a house and, Joe committed a murder in it, yeah, they have to tell you, there's somebody killed on your property at that time. Well, so he went and he looked at it, see if there was anything happened. There had been deaths on the land before, so that would go back in county records, I can imagine. But it says here, nothing unnatural. So there was no murders or nothing like that they knew of. When I told my wife about it, she shrugged and said, any place in the Old South, so that's where the Old South, that's that statement, Old South, was bound to have had people die on it. Now, I don't understand what that statement means, but could it be the Old South, maybe Civil War? We went back to work on the house. I hired a small company to build a small barn behind the house, big enough to keep 4 horses in for a hobby farm. One of the men who worked for the company told my wife and me that the people who lived in the house before we bought the land were good folks. He said they lived quiet lives and worked hard. Everything was good until they tore the old homestead down and built the new home. Well, okay. So there was a homestead there, or a lot of people call homestead the old homestead we used to have here, we tore down. So that might be the first house built on the property. You know, it could be the second or third house, but let's say it's the first house built on the property. It was probably a big country home. The people lived in it and might have worked the land or whatever. And the house got to be too big and might have been even starting to get run down, too big to take care of as they grew older. So maybe the house got to be too demanding, and they thought it'd be better to tear it down and build the house. Well, the house they're working on. So build a house and something more manageable. However, it doesn't say here if it was a bungalow or ranch style or Cape Cod or what it was. They were good folks. They lived quiet, worked hard. Everything was good until they tore the old homestead. Tore down the old homestead and built a new home. When they were tearing down the old home, some bones were found in one wall. The old sheriff came out and collected the bones. This was in 1979. The bones were taken to a local funeral home after a short investigation and then buried in a local church cemetery. Well, that's never good. So these folks were tearing down the old home and they found bones. Now, obviously, they were human bones, or they would have never buried them in a church cemetery. 1979. Now, I was born in 1969, so I was 10 years old when this happened, and a whole other country away. Yeah. So who knows? Well, they went and checked. There was nobody ever murdered. All the deaths that died on the land, all the recorded deaths, let me put it that way, all the recorded deaths were deemed natural causes. Probably old age, heart attack, pneumonia, might have been some falls even, or an accident from farming or whatever. They were natural. There was no suspicious deaths. But finding somebody walled up, bones, that tells me that whoever's in that wall wasn't meant to be found. uh, and then to move them bones and bury them in a church parking lot church cemetery without knowing. So it's not like you're giving a name to this person. This person's received no justice of any kind. And in 1979, an old sheriff, God knows he might have just took them right to the coroner and said, yeah, they were found wherever. Don't know nothing about it. I'm not going to waste any of my resources on it. You know, the coroner might have said they've been dead for anywhere from 50 to 150 years, so God knows. And left it at that. I mean, this person's going to receive no nothing. My wife and I found out that the owners started having trouble shortly after the bones were buried. They started losing stuff, maybe animals. I'm not sure, it doesn't say here, but I mean by trouble, it sounds like maybe that was the same thing that these poor folks were having. I shrugged off the story of the bones and kept working on the house while the company worked on the barn. My wife and I finished the rebuilding of the house and the building of the barn. We never lived on the property. Oh, they finished rebuilding the house, and the barn, but never lived on the property, as we were forced to bury our two beloved German shepherds before the completion. They don't say how old the dogs were. He doesn't say how old the dogs were. I mean, German shepherds are a beautiful dog. I mean, I'm a dog lover. But before we left, I would see, we buried our two beloved German shepherds. Before we left, I'm assuming he means before we left the property, packed it in. I would see a dark shape of the trees behind the barn every night. To me, it seemed that whatever it was watching the house. Mark Z. So whatever might have, when they tore down the original homestead, whatever was there on that original homestead, to me, whatever was buried there was, it might have been contained until they released those bones, and then maybe that was, maybe somebody was, had something evil done to them. It's hard to say, but for that person just to all of a sudden, that family that lived and worked there and never had any issues, all of a sudden start having issues, building a new house and then selling the land or getting out of it. Or I don't know how many people it owned between 1979, if it was one family that owned it right up until Mark and his wife bought it, or if it had gone through many hands or what. But that's a letter. Anyways, that's... and he wanted to know if anybody else had had that experience. Well, I can tell you probably quite a few people have had that experience. Be it shadow figures or even darker, malevolent energies out there. It's most certainly not good, and it's to lose two pets. It's pretty vicious. And I mean, it's certainly leave you something to think about anyways for tonight. Like I said, this is going to be a short one, be about 20 minutes long. Anyways, gang, I'll leave you with that for tonight. I'll talk to you tomorrow night. I'm going to be doing more and more podcasts as we go. Okay. Have a good night. Be kind to each other. Bye.